We've posted many of his clips from breakfornews.com, The Beautiful Truth. And Fintan, famous cutting-edge investigative journalist, broadcaster, and entrepreneur, and famed professional conspiracy analyst from the Republic of Ireland. Here he is. So let's have a hand for Fintan.
Thanks very much, folks. We hopefully will cover a lot of ground tonight. It's great to be with you. I'd like to thank Pat Cornwell and Pat Kell for arranging this and for inviting me here tonight. It's terrific to be with you. And I'm looking forward to sharing the philosophy which the Samui group has. And Samui Real, I think, is a wonderful philosophy. And it's a kind of open-minded approach which we all need. I think that this is the new medium in which we can develop our ideas, our politics, by this kind of direct exchange outside of mainstream media control. So it's wonderful to be here with you tonight. What I'm going to do is go ahead, Pat. Now. Yeah.
No, it's all yours.
Okay, so what I'd hope to do, folks, is to allow you to feedback too. If anyone would like to, you can log in to Telegram and feedback stuff to me here live, because I can see that live. To get to the Telegram group where you can interact live, just go to fintandunne.com, fintandunne.com/Telegram. That will take you straight into the Telegram group. And we'll take it from there. So what I'm going to do tonight is, rather than give a huge, long spiel, I'm going to divide it up into a couple of areas. The first area we'll cover is AIDS, 9/11, and COVID, the nature of those and why they are three Psywars and what the implications of that are. Then I'd like to get into the issue of disinformation, deception, and what I call the CIA fakes, which is about the need for us to become very careful about the media, alternative media that we're consuming. And then in the final segment, I'll just give you a bit of a teaser to some new work, which I've been working on over about 20 years, 30 years even, which has come to fruition and which is about the nature of reality and some breakthroughs in that, which are very, very simple. And that's about really just looking at reality in entirely new ways. I think the events which we've had over the last few years have enabled people to free up and to think for themselves and to re-examine a lot of the things that we've taken for granted, and not a moment too soon. And one of the key themes of all of this I'll be doing is to, at all times, create a wide context for what we're doing. And welcome Richard and Tony and Tom and Bruce to the Telegram group. And if you have comments, do please feed them back to me as we go. And I'll try and deal with them. And Pat will be happy to, in the room, to take questions in advance and sort of line them up if you want to follow up on this. So he's given a little bit of background there. And let me see if I can go ahead, Pat. Are we getting loud and clear there?
Loud and clear. I think that was coming through off. Somebody needs to mute anyone joining on Telegram or WhatsApp. Can you mute your mic? Oh, it's on Zoom. Sorry, Zoom. On Zoom. Can you mute? Yeah. On Zoom, can you mute your mic?
Okay. So we'll just press on there, and if you would mute your mic, and just check the status of your mic to make sure it is muted. And I'll see if I can transition over to this screen here, where we just we just try the phrase arch conspiracy theorist Fintan Dunne. And you might have to, be careful about making noise, and if your mic's unmuted, because you will flip the screen back to you and away from me. So arch conspiracy theorist Fintan Dunne, if you put that into Google, you will get the Mail and Guardian there, third link down. And it's the triumph of unreason from 2002 by someone in the Mail and Guardian. Let me see if I can get me up here again so that I'm not off screen while we're there. That's better. So I hope you can see there now, Mail and Guardian, The Triumph of Unreason. And that was about AIDS dissidents. And really, that's where the story starts in many ways, because it's about AIDS 9/11 and COVID. And this was on the 19th of April, 2002. And at this stage, this was a resounding critique by the Mail and Guardian of Thabo Mbeki, the president of South Africa, who was disinclined to go along with the pharmaceutical corporate agenda in relation to HIV/AIDS. If you wouldn't mind, said Mbeki, I can actually get more bang for my buck putting in proper sanitation for the people in South Africa in the townships than I can spending it on your expensive AIDS drugs, which actually I've got serious questions about, and I'm doubting whether they actually work. Obviously, to have a Black president who one could, in a rather racist fashion, assume wouldn't be quite up to speed on white man's medicine, it was absolutely disgusting. And so these attacks, which included on Mbeki, and it says here, it's a wonder Thabo Mbeki has the mental endurance to trawl the AIDS dissident network on the internet. It's a deeply depressing and claustrophobic experience. Yes, that's it. Thabo Mbeki, the president of South Africa, closet conspiracy theorist back in 2000, 2001, 2002. And the article goes on then to complain about sites like VirusMyth, AIDSmyth, which was my own website, ACT UP, Reclaim, Shirley's Wellness, etc., and complain about the inevitable dissident scientists like Peter Duesberg and David Rasnick and the febrile New York journalist Celia Farber. Translate that into the should be award-winning international legendary investigative journalist Celia Farber, former marketing executive John Lordsman, Irishman, arch conspiracy Fintan Dunne, and Mbeki's muse or advisor, South Africa's Anita Allen. And this is the background to HIV/AIDS and to all that's been going on. When Thabo Mbeki went to the United States, he spoke to the Washington Post. And this was a time when we were actually winning the battle against Big Pharma on this issue. The Washington Post reported that Mbeki had said that he was concerned about the phosphoryl relations of AZT, Glaxo Wellcome's premier HIV/AIDS drug, the one which demonstrators had clamored outside of the gates of the US regulatory authorities demanding access to this drug immediately, demanding access to AZT to treat HIV/AIDS. We don't even need clinical trials. This thing supposedly works. It's been tested in the test tubes in Glaxo Wellcome. We want it now. Those people protesting outside the gates of Glaxo Wellcome came from AIDS organizations that were funded by Glaxo Wellcome. Isn't that something? Outside, protesting outside the headquarters of the place that's funding them and demanding that these drugs be released. Glaxo Wellcome had taken drug marketing to new levels, and they had actively recruited the HIV/AIDS community as the propaganda machinery of distribution for those drugs. What Mbeki pointed out when he went to the United States to the Washington Post about the phosphoryl relations was something that the Washington Post got completely wrong. Mbeki was the one who knew the science. There's no such thing as phosphoryl relations. What it is phosphorylation, which is a scientific, technical, chemical term for what happens to HIV/AIDS drug when you have it in your body and it has to then become effective. The Washington Post didn't even know what he was talking about. He was so far above their heads. Now, what does this phosphorylation mean? Well, they tested it in a test tube where it's already phosphorylated. But the question was, when you put it in a human being, you can't put it in phosphorylated, because phosphorylated, it won't get into the cells. You have to put it in unphosphorylated, and it has to add 3 phosphor groups in order to be an effective antiretroviral and prevent the HIV from reverse transcription into your DNA. add the 3 phosphor groups when it gets into the cell. That's going to be no problem. It had it in the test tube. It'll just add them when it gets into the cell. Turned out that 10 subsequent studies, quoted by a South African barrister called Anthony Brink, acting in a legal case on behalf of a solicitor called Mark Heyman in South Africa, who died as a result of being put on AZT. He determined that 10 subsequent studies of AZT showed that it was very likely that it was not at all effective in human beings in reverse transcription prevention. It could just about add 1 phosphor group. If it got up early in the morning and did a workout, it could maybe add 2. It was virtually impossible for it to add 3 and become an actual effective antiretroviral. Now, if that's true, it means that those people who died of HIV/AIDS in the early wave could potentially have been killed by AZT and is having no medical benefit whatsoever for them. None. In fact, they reduced the doses of AZT from the initial 1,200 milligrams to a lower dose because many of the activists in the area felt it was killing the patients off too quick. It says on the bottle of AZT in the warnings, caution, toxic by inhalation or contact, and it advises clinicians that this drug may cause symptoms indistinguishable from HIV/AIDS. Hold on, doctor. How do I know the symptoms I have are from HIV/AIDS and they're not from the drug? If the symptoms of the drug may be indistinguishable from HIV/AIDS. I mean, I could just be killed by the medication and nobody would even question it. They'd say, he died of HIV/AIDS. So this is the gory, gruesome background out of which all this arises. And this is what got me labeled a conspiracy theorist for associating myself with these kinds of views when put out by Mbeki and others. And when you think about that one, and when you think about the fact that Tony Fauci was involved in that, Tony Fauci was the doctor who was involved in dealing with examining in detail the first 6 puzzling cases of HIV/AIDS, or a strange disease which seemed to be spreading among gays. Tony Fauci, who then came forward and says, well, looks like we have a new viral disease here, a terrible viral disease which could potentially wipe out most of the planet. It was Tony Fauci. Talk about the same MO when he comes back and does it all over again, eh? What do you think about that one? The same MO, the same guy. Now, it's a little bit of a stretch of a coincidence for me to accept that Tony Fauci is involved centrally in the HIV virus issue. And at the same time, he's involved centrally then 34 years later in COVID. Another huge global fear. And if you actually measure the number of days between, say, HIV/AIDS in April 1984, announced by Margaret Heckler as the cause, without actually it being peer reviewed by scientists, government announced that, no peer review. And you count the days from that date to 9/11, it's around about 6,500 days, I think. And the days from 9/11 to COVID is about another 6,500 days. It's about 17 and a half years or thereabouts between the two, AIDS, 17 and a half years, 9/11, 17 and a half years, COVID. Hit them every 17 and a half years, hit every generation, Psywar them, mess with their heads. I mean, the HIV/AIDS Psywar was absolutely wonderful. And now the question we're beginning to ask, and I hope you're beginning to ask yourself when I've got to this point, is how come I'm only hearing this now from you, Fintan Dunne? How come all my favorite people all over the internet in the conspiracy world aren't all talking about the fact that Tony Fauci was involved back in the AIDS thing, wasn't he too? Maybe that was a scam too. Put your blinkers back on. Don't look into the past. Don't get a wider context. Don't ask those questions. Let's just focus on the COVID. Let's just focus on something really narrow where we won't see the wider picture and understand how we've been mind-fucked 3 times as a planet by these people. And their ability to screw with your brain is their primary weapon, not just in mainstream media, but also in alternative media. Because the fact that you're not hearing that discussed in all the time we've had to discuss this COVID issue, that nobody's backtracked back to that, is very telling. And it tells you that you're being conned by the entire spectrum of alternative media that is out there covering this issue and raising all the important issues. Right now, in fact, that spectrum is being very narrowed. And right now they're focusing on their fake conspiracy theory. Their fake conspiracy theory right now in relation to COVID. They have it ready. It was a lab leak. At last, the truth's getting out. The government denied for a long time that it was a lab leak. And they even called people conspiracy theorists. It was terrible. You couldn't get the truth out. But now, at last, the truth is breaking out. And we finally realized it was a lab leak after all. And now the ball over to our friends in alternative media who will run with that. Yes, and here we are in alternative media. Yes, it's terrible the mainstream did that, isn't it? And at last we have the truth out. Look, it was a lab leak after all. See, we were right. We were right in alternative media. It was a lab leak. So what is this circus selling you? It wasn't a lab leak. It was a biological warfare weapon attack on the rest of the planet by the fucking New World Order. A deliberate, planned, orchestrated lab leak. No accident. And so the alternative media then begins to feed you finally we got the truth out about it. It was a lab leak. And these games were played in 9/11 as well too, where they had an alternative media there, primed to feed you bullshit in relation to 9/11 and make sure that you never, ever, ever got close to the truth of that. So these are the key questions which I raise in the work that I do as an actual professional, full-time and unashamed and unabashed conspiracy theorist. Because if we could start a party in the morning, folks, I hope many of you would agree that we would actually be able to, we'd probably get about 15% of the vote if we started a conspiracy theory party in the morning. So I don't want to deny conspiracy theory because it's a lovely catch-all for things we're not supposed to be allowed to believe. But it's a bit of a worn and tired agenda, a bit of a worn and tired one, because they've thrown that conspiracy theory around for so long. And it's time to come up with a new one. So they have. And this will just again show you the extent to which the alternative media is actually a landscape they've constructed. And that's the flat earth issue. So flat earth is a creation of theirs. Why did they create flat earth? Well, they needed a new way to be able to describe conspiracy theorists, because you're a conspiracy theorist, it's lost its edge. It's no punch left in it anymore. Hey, flat earther. Okay, now we know what we're talking. Flat earther, yes. Just to be reinforced in the mind of all the normies that on the internet, you just have these lunatics and idiots, right? Just full of lunatics and idiots and morons. Full of them. And they believe all sorts of stupid things like flat earth. Imagine them believing flat earth. I mean, how would those stupid people on the internet believe that kind of rubbish just because we spent 10, 15, 20 million marketing it at them, launching it, establishing it as a meme. And we also set up the anti-flat earth people too. And then we set the two of them to war with each other on the internet. And then we spread news of that war all around the normies just to show them how stupid things are on the internet. So this idea of making sure that everyone knows how stupid things are on the internet, and an alternative media is all that they're primed with bullshit to talk about and then to feed to you. That's been the kind of work I've been doing. And I'd like to then feed into that a little bit now in the stuff I start getting into. But having laid out that basic premise of where we're going, I'm just going to pause and take some feedback and comments if anybody has them from the group on that much anyway. And over to you, Pat.
Right on. Thanks, Fintan. Now, who's, in your view, behind Mr. Fauci? I mean, he was appointed by Bush Senior. Is he one of the big players behind this whole overarching Psywar operation you're describing?
Yeah, well, that's a great place to start in terms of who's behind Fauci, because that should hopefully network us out into more. So I'll follow up on Fauci and Glaxo in a moment. I just want to make sure, we're sort of covering AIDS, COVID, and 9/11 all in one go here, folks. It's the only way to cover it, because it's all one thing. And a big impediment to all the arguments that we try and make to get to others and make them understand is fatally undermined by the fact that we can't and we don't provide that historical context, broader historical context, because that would give the game away. And none of the alternative analysts are saying that. So let's just turn to Fauci and his origins. Like, the Wellcome Trust is very involved in the COVID thing as well. The Wellcome Trust in the United Kingdom. And remember, it was Glaxo Wellcome out of which this came. So the roots are in the British, German pharmaceutical industries and pharmaceutical industries. And in Dutch financial circles, just highlighting important areas here now, and then also in the US military industrial complex and Old Eastern establishment and the Bush Senior complex. I call it the Bush Senior complex because it's very important to realize that all of these people that we've seen paraded across our screens as presidents of the United States have been one cabal. It's been the cabal. And that cabal took power when George Bush Senior took power. So who is behind Fauci? New World Order, Anglo-Americans, Pharmachem, all of that as the power structure behind, and the Bush apparatus. Now, this is another thing that your alternative media won't talk to you about, which is that the Bush apparatus is the driving force of this. Since Bush assassinated Kennedy in '63, we know Bush Senior's linked to that. We know Prescott Bush is linked to Hitler, is linked to the funding of the World War II. And we know the geopolitical reasons for that as well, which was to use Russia and Europe to destroy each other and then walk in and take over the remains. Yeah. So that's the Bushes. And George Bush Senior is a very clever dictator because he doesn't fall into the trap, and couldn't really, of being an overt dictatorship. No. Senior is very happy to be running things as long as he's running things. Doesn't have to be in the front of the camera. Anyway, he got his into the CIA. He was appointed to the CIA, and then he pulled a whole load of people out of the CIA when Jimmy Carter reforms the CIA during his administration to drive out a lot of people whose loyalties were suspect as to whether truly who they were loyal to the state or were they loyal to some other institution or whatever. And all of those people went into the Bush cabal's black intelligence operations apparatus. So if you like, the clean out of the CIA was used as a way of recruiting people into the black apparatus. So Carter unknowingly playing his role. And that clean out of the CIA merely created the black structure, which was then able to operationally carry out 9/11. So now you have a little bit of a picture of the power structure. Understand that Bush Sr. didn't need to be out there front ruling. As long as he had first Clinton acting as a stooge and then Obama, who is an avowed advocate of George Bush Sr.'s foreign policy. He said many times how much he admired George Bush Sr.'s foreign policy. I mean, this was his signing up as a neocon, excuse me. And of course, Obama was launched by John Kerry, another part of the cabal, at the 2004 Democratic Convention, where he gave a speech which was, everyone was shocked. Wow, I realized we had such a talented guy among us. Who's he? Well, he's the illegitimate son of an Indonesian cult leader and the son of a CIA agent, his mother, and his notional father, another CIA operative. So these were intelligence operatives, and Obama was an intelligence operative from the beginning, especially as when he graduated, he went straight to work for an intelligence-linked operation in business. And also you had that birther thing surrounding him to make sure that anybody who did question his origins in any way was regarded as a deeply suspect tinfoil hat conspiracy theorist individual. So that was a very nice smokescreen around the fact that actually it wasn't about his birth cert at all, the issues around his origin. It was about where did he come from and who was he stunting for? And that was, of course, as I say, the Bush cabal again. And the third one they had ready, the third stooge for the cabal, as George Bush Sr. aged and the whole cabal itself began to actually go geriatric through its own internal corruptions and through the social developments that we're moving on with. We saw this cabal start to lose power. We saw the terrible, unfortunate accident with Donald Trump. And that was just a beautiful accident that had to happen for us.
Right. So would it be fair to say Bush Sr. set up his own private intelligence network based around the old CIA structure, but it was a rogue operation? Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. And that black operations unit, has military power and was involved in 9/11. And I'd like to just take a little venture into the 9/11 issue here now as well too. Let me see if I can pull that up. Yeah, with WAG the WTC. So WAG the WTC, the prequel. And this is an article which I published in 2001 on the 4th of October. And that was 21 days after the attacks. And at that stage, with research by Cathy McMahon, the late Cathy McMahon, my partner, we had pretty much uncovered most of what needed to be revealed about 9/11. And if you like, this is where I got famous, because this article had 250,000 hits, which back at the time, within a week or so, which was incredible for an internet at the time that wasn't really huge, or huge in terms of conspiracy theories for sure. But around about another 4 or 5 weeks after that, we withdrew from the internet. And the website in which this was published, we shut it down. And we did that defensively, and I think it was a good move, because Bill Cooper, who's the real Alex Jones, or in other words, Bill Cooper is the guy who was a radio broadcaster in the United States who does an intelligent and mature and well-informed analysis of the New World Order, which is very like Alex Jones's, except He didn't work for the New World Order. Alex Jones does, as does Ike. Bill Cooper was killed a few weeks after 9/11 because it was necessary to take Bill Cooper out. You couldn't have the fake Alex Jones, who had modeled himself on Cooper, who was essentially imitating him and then turning him into a tabloid caricature of a conspiracy theorist. They killed Bill Cooper. So I think in the context of a few weeks after 9/11, them killing Bill Cooper, that our decision to withdraw and to sort of drop out for a while was a good idea. It was a dangerous time to be publishing this kind of stuff. And what was this kind of stuff? Well, some of the key stuff: thermal imaging of the World Trade Center gives the game away, showing the huge hole in the customs building. And over here, entirely gone, World Trade Center 7. And so we highlighted the fact that how the hell did World Trade Center 7 fall when the debris didn't come anywhere near it? And where the customs house, which is there, is still intact. We also were talking about the fact that controlled demolition were first to the scene. And they're the people who carried away the remains of the Oklahoma building, the Murrah building in Oklahoma. And we thought that was relevant to bring up because, of course, this was against the backdrop of many people in the southern states who are now sort of the MAGA movement of today, thinking that the government had been involved in orchestrating that event, and therefore very suspicious of everything around Oklahoma. There's one particular issue that would be very important there, and that's the blast velocity of a fertilizer bomb is not sufficient to tear concrete off of rebar. It can push buildings over, it can do all sorts of things, but it can't rip concrete off of rebar. And at the Murrah building, concrete was ripped off of rebar. So they had their suspicions. And then when controlled demolition showed up at the World Trade Center, getting the contract to haul all the stuff away, we thought that was worth letting people know about. We also then nailed the fact that Van Romero, who worked for New Mexico Tech, was a guy who said that he thought the building's collapse was a controlled demolition, and then about a week to 10 days later, changed his mind and said, no, it wasn't. And we were reporting that fact. And we're reporting the fact that the company he worked for were among the first responders on the Pentagon crash scene. And we thought it was relevant that a guy whose company were among the first responders to the Pentagon crash scene was saying that it was a controlled demolition, was something that we should let people know about. And also they were looking to get the contract for the federal air marshals. And most tellingly of all, we also revealed that most of the World Trade Center changed hands in a $3.2 billion 99-year lease deal that was concluded 7 weeks before the attack, with a sweetheart tax deal and new insurance covering buildings and rent payable to new beneficiaries. Are you getting the picture? And just in case people weren't fully getting the picture, then we told them that this was a psyop. We said, let's stop reacting and overreacting. We are meant to react in shock. The whole purpose of the World Trade Center attack was to psych us out. Does the World Trade Center attack feel like a movie? It does. Well, of course it does. It's been specifically written as a movie script. Needless to say, this was blowing the whistle on every important aspect of that. And that article raised an awful lot of questions. Then further down, we went into great detail on Westfield, Silverstein, and the World Trade Center Golden Goose, showing how the Port Authority of New York had signed a deal with Silverstein's Westfield America on the 26th of April, 2001. Westfield America leased the mall and Silverstein the office portion. And we said the deal was finalized and celebrated on the 23rd of July, just 7 weeks before the entire complex was destroyed. And the Port Authority officers gave a giant set of keys to the complex to Larry Silverstein and to Westfield CEO Lowy. We went into detail all of it. We talked about the insurance, and we ended up saying Silverstein has insurance money. And this is 21 days after the attack. We're talking about all of this stuff and bringing all this out. Silverstein has insurance money to rebuild to get 110 million of annual rental income flowing again, or double that with his planned 4 towers. He was talking about 4 towers at the time. I said, nice money if you can get it. Can he get it? Well, we wrote, not if the insurers could help it, and they're the big losers. They detest having to pay out on a claim on a policy taken out only weeks before. Indeed, they often delay payment to investigate cases where immediate claims are made against brand new policies. I think we asked enough hard questions about 9/11 there. What do you reckon, Pat?
Good. Now, we'll see if there's any questions in the audience before we move on to part 2, shall we? Okay. Anybody got any questions at this stage before we move on to the next segment? Okay.
Sorry, Fintan, it's me, Pat. I have a question about the actual date, 9/11. Is there anything like geometrically speaking or numerologically speaking, is there anything significant about the actual date itself that you looked into?
Not particularly, no.
Okay.
Not particularly. The event itself, though, has a huge symbolic content in it because it's about the collapse of the Twin Towers. And the Twin Towers is the Twin Towers of duality, the black and white division.
Right.
So it actually symbolized the collapse of division. So in a weird way, they were symbolically heralding their own downfall, not realizing it as they did it, you know. But But the most important things to realize about that event, as we were talking about there, is the psychological warfare aspect of it. And that's something that we need to touch on, because the way that was, and we need, just for the record, because I'm sure loads of people want to know how it was done. And let's come back to my article. Because it was in 2005, I started the big attack on all of this stuff. But let's come back to my article about the fact that the name of the contractor, whose people were first on the World Trade Center collapse scene to cart away the rubble, is the same contractor who demolished and hauled away the shell of the bombed Oklahoma Murrah building and buried it in a big hole in the ground and put a security fence around it with guards, by the way. You weren't getting near that rubble. The name of that contractor is Controlled Demolition. Their cleanup contract is worth over $7 billion. And then Van Romero, who worked for New Mexico Tech, who told us he thought it was a controlled demolition. They're selling us controlled demolition. That's why they had the Murrah building people come in. Not because we wouldn't get them. I mean, that's a red rag to the southern states, to the MAGA people, bringing them in. It's like rubbing it in. Yeah, we did Murrah, and we just did 9/11 too. And we're using the same outfit to haul away the thing, because it was a controlled, both those are controlled demolitions. Yeah, that's us. We did it. Yeah. And Van Romero hammering it in. Controlled demolition. It's because they want you to think it's a controlled demolition. They're seeding the whole idea. That's like, you see, when you're investigating, you see that's just, they laid it on too thick. Laid it on too thick. That's the first thing got me suspicious about this. Not a controlled demolition. And yet all of, again, alternative media are just hammering on that all the time. Or you can see the squibs coming out and the sounds of the bombs going off. And yeah, all of that. Because from the get-go, they're sending you down the wrong route. They're sending you down the controlled demolition route. They know exactly what they're doing. They're totally in control of how they're going to psychologically manipulate not only the mainstream reaction, but the alternative media. And they will have an entire crew of disinformation operatives waiting then to amplify that and keep on the search for how they did the controlled demolition. Well, I'll tell you how they did it. It's different. So the way they actually did it, and this is how the Psywar comes in, is, well, they hit the North Tower first to get every camera in the world on the scene. And then they brought the second plane in to hit the South Tower. And we saw a huge pyrotechnic display. Because that pyrotechnic display had been carefully constructed, the fact that all of that stuff came out the side of the building and we got the huge fireball was a deliberate construction of the way that the building had been hit. Because with every camera in the world there, they wanted to deliver something which they articulated as a mechanism of the Iraq War subsequently. Remember the Iraq War? They said it was going to be a war which would feature shock and awe. A new way of totally demoralizing a population with an act that's so outrageous and shocking that it just takes your breath away and renders you incapable of resisting. That's what they did on 9/11. And they set that scene up for that psychological effect. And then the mechanism of doing it was not controlled demolition, which you were being directed down that route. It was that they simply bolted cruise missile technology to 2 planes, 3 planes. And they used a targeting system to zone those planes in. And if you look at the plane which hit the second tower, the one that gave you that pyrotechnic display, you'll discover that it made 5 seconds out or so a course correction, which altered the position of its wings. And then 2.5 seconds out, it made another course correction. And those course corrections were such that it hit square on the building with both engines striking the tower simultaneously. Even though the plane had come in from an angle, by the time it had made those 2 twists, it was square onto the tower and able to deliver the fuel plane load right into the tower at exactly the right angle. So you get deep penetration. If you hit the building with one engine first instead of the other, you're going to get the wrong distribution. Had to be square onto the building. Another thing it had to be was it had to not hit level. This is another thing that will confirm for you that I'm correct in these. Now, a pilot coming in who's highly inexperienced and who's flying a plane that's doing in excess of 500 miles an hour. And I've flown flight simulator, and I've flown it in such a way as you practice flying between the 2 towers and stuff like that. It's damn hard. That thing comes up at you with 500 miles an hour. You wouldn't believe that 500 miles an hour the thing is coming at you at. So I have one eyewitness, which we located during the course of those intensive investigations over that 21-day period. And that eyewitness said that he could see the air control surfaces on that plane flipping at high speed, twitching was the way he described it, twitching as the plane came in. Twitching of an air control surface, like a rudder, aileron, elevator, that's a sign of computer control. About 50 times a second, that thing was monitoring its exact position in 3D space, and it was adjusting in order to follow the perfect flight path in. And the same was done with the Pentagon, where we were meant to believe that a huge airliner like that could be just brought down at those kinds of speeds, down to within like 20, 30, 40 feet of the ground, without just smacking into the ground, as again, an inexperienced pilot would inevitably do, or missing altogether. And with laser focus, went straight into the Pentagon. And just to put the final piece of icing on the cake of the degree of deception that's going on in all of this, convincing you about controlled demolition, sending you down all these cul-de-sacs that lead nowhere. The Pentagon issue. Around about another month or so after that article I produced, we had a video come out called Hunt the Boeing, came out of France. And it was all about the fact that, hey, no plane hit the Pentagon. It was a missile. Conspiracy theory was up and running, folks. And it's them, of course. Not a genuine conspiracy theory, but another red herring. And what was that red herring about? Well, playing into the red herring were the FBI, who went around and confiscated all videos from service stations, retail stores, you name it, anywhere that had a video camera, they confiscated the tapes of what had been seen going in, and nobody was allowed to see anything of what had come anywhere near that Pentagon. Hey, so the conspiracy theorists, the fake ones, who are out there, hey, they said, the FBI are hiding those tapes. What have they got to hide? We know what you're trying to hide. There was no plane. Us conspiracy theorists, we're onto it. We're not stupid. There was no plane. Yes, we are stupid, actually, because we're buying this complete pile of bullshit. The whole idea here is to make conspiracy theorists look really stupid from the beginning. Now, despite the fact that that's total bullshit, right? That a plane did actually hit and it was full of passengers. These planes were hijacked electronically. They were hijacked using, they didn't need people. They didn't need people alive in them. You could just kill them all with nerve gas and fly the plane into the buildings. But there were people in those planes. And there was a plane that hit the Pentagon. And the reason we know there was a plane that hit the Pentagon is that the thing that all these conspiracy theorist sites never, ever mentioned, admitted, or referenced at all, while they wound everybody up for years that there was no plane that hit the Pentagon and discredited everybody by getting them to adopt that position. They never mentioned something that anyone could, if they went to the trouble, confirm that in fact, hundreds, literally, of forensic investigators from all over the United States had traveled to the Pentagon scene, where, with the help of others, they had dug through and found the individual pieces of human flesh. And then they had DNA tracked every single piece of human flesh that they found in the remains back to the original families using DNA verification of the flesh, and they returned those remains to those families for burial. And the people marketing this shit on the internet to the conspiracy theorists pissed all over their grief as they deliberately ignored how can you fake hundreds of qualified forensic pathologists volunteering from all over the United States, coming on an emergency basis and identifying all the flesh and matching that up with the relatives? You couldn't possibly fake that. It proves beyond question, without doubt, that a plane hit the Pentagon. And yet, as I say, this is the shit that your alternative media is full of, and it's full of it deliberately, because these people, especially, they didn't need it at the time of AIDS. They had so much media control. They just could concentrate on mainstream media. But we had an internet by the time we got to 9/11. And these people were absolutely waiting for you. They didn't want to infiltrate a 9/11 truth movement that might come out. What I revealed in 2005, which got me dropped from all of these sites, which is why you never hear about me, despite the fact that Break for News itself, the website, after we outed them all, has had 100 million views, 100 million visitors, I should say, is that obviously it's dropped me immediately. I came out with all that, because it exposes the fact that we've been just led around by the nose by our so-called alternative media. And I think it's wonderful to see that David Icke has come out now in a video in recent days attacking Donald Trump. Thank you, David, for revealing yourself. Would you mind peeling off some of your skin there, and let's have a look at the lizard skin underneath.
All right. We've got another question here, Fintan.
Mm-hmm.
All right, you ready?
Yeah.
Okay. So look over here.
Okay. Hello.
Hi.
Earlier you mentioned that Bush Senior was where this pretty much started.
Mm-hmm.
So prior to, though, Bush Senior, we hear a lot of conspiracy about players for 1,000 years, you know, and the reptilians and on. Where do you think, go backward from Bush, and what's your take on where this started pre-Bush? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It does. All right. Yeah. I would say that from the point of view of all of us who want to move on, you know, who want to develop, who want to get somewhere, who want to deal with real issues and all of that, that it's largely irrelevant, and that most of that conspiracy theory material is deliberately fostered and promoted by them as it trawls back through ancient history and attempts to prove bloodlines and all sorts of. The real power at any time is always in the current generation and individuals who are in power, in the power structure right now. And, you know, that's where the power lies. So where do they come out of? I think Sergei Glaziev really nailed it. I can't remember the exact words he described them by, but he says they came out of Venice, which they did, and then they moved to Amsterdam, which they did, and then they moved to Britain and to the city of London, which they did, and then they moved to the United States and took that over. So yeah, that is their progression if you really want to track them back, and that's it in a nutshell and shortened. But I think that for us to spend huge amounts of time delving into them and trying to see if they do, what kind of ritual sacrifices have they been conducting down the years and all that, that's just bullshit. That's just designed to tabloidize the issue. Be very careful of when you start seeing conspiracy issues turn into stories that would sit nicely on the front of Weekly World News. You know, the one that runs aliens in White House in secret negotiations. You know? That's the whole idea. You know, so that's always the danger for us, that we're unknowingly lured into their stuff, and their stuff is always tabloid, sensational, historic, and you know, it rather than talk about the realities, which is really grey people, soulless people, only interested in power, money, control. You know, which is the true realities. They're instead turned into this blood-drinking, adrenochrome-seeking bunch of time-traveling vampires. That's all bullshit. You know, power is it's about power and money right here, right now. And as you know, as we all know, the losing, which is great.
Thank you.
Just on the losing part, so some in the audience aren't fully conversant with the New World Order agenda in the way you might know it. So we can see how those three Psywars were designed to, you know, to get us prepared for the final, you know, the Great Reset, the New World Order agenda that was going to come in. That Klaus Schwab talks about, the Great Reset, which was going to lead us to the New World Order. How did you see them playing that after the COVID operation? Obviously, things have gone sideways for them. It's like Trump put some holes in their boat, perhaps. How are they going to leap from COVID to the final takeover, in your view? Yeah,
well, they're not now. It's over.
So right.
It's over. You know, they had a good go, yeah. And they, as you say, Trump screwed up the timing. It screwed it all up, in fact, because the Republican Party they're ready to bury it, just like you see the UK establishment is burying the Conservative Party right now deliberately. The Conservative Party is being deliberately imploded by the elite, deliberately, because they want to fracture it into old Tories and then the sort of Brexit hardliner people who are close to the actual grassroots, you know. So you have those. Where were we? What we were on to? Because I veered it off there. Bring me back.
So that they've got one shot at this. They fired their shot, and now they're it's a.
Oh yeah. So therefore it's over. Yeah. So they're, you know. Sorry. Yeah. So I'll follow that through. So the same thing was supposed to happen in the USA. They were going to implode, destroy the Republican Party. It had just about demographically seen it, you know, because it all older people in the Republican Party, and it's just about job done. And all they needed was to follow up their caricature created Well, first black president with their caricature created, first woman president. Aren't we so liberal? And then Hillary would have hit us with the COVID. Hillary would have hit us with the COVID. And if you think that what happened under Trump, I think that Trump should have stood up to that. And this is what Ike is saying now. Well, then, no, that's not possible. But had Hillary got in, and had they got their timing right, and this been a few years back, yeah, whole different story. The problem was that it's actually moved beyond Trump now, because it's not actually about Trump anymore. And I think a lot of people outside the United States don't realize that. It's about MAGA, which is the working class and the disenchanted and disenfranchised middle class, pretty much, which are the majority. And it's about their just disenchantment with the entire structure and their opposition to what's called the deep state. And Trump is now poised to move in on that. So what David Icke is saying, his criticisms of Trump, we just nailed them, because you're going to hear it going around, and it just gives you an idea of what's actually going on. So his problem with Trump, well, how did Trump get through? Because look, the way they stopped Bernie Sanders, they could have stopped Trump just as much. There was 20 candidates there, and they could easily stop Trump, just like they stopped Bernie. No, they couldn't. They couldn't stop Trump. That was the whole problem. They couldn't stop him. He carved his way through that field of 20. He carved up the entire Republican establishment, one by one by one by one by one. That's what happened. So Trump was the huge blocker in terms of the timing of the entire agenda. And he also activated the base. Now, at this point, you could get rid of Trump and it wouldn't make no difference. The base want what the base want. And if it's not delivered, they'll just get rid of who isn't delivering, and they'll get someone who is. And they're not stupid anymore. They're not going to buy any dumb moves anymore. And they've got serious problems. But Ike says that Trump shouldn't have got through. Answer to that, he only got through, by a lot of luck. He only won the election by the guts of 70,000 votes when you added them all up, spread across the key states, but just enough to do it. So it was a razor-thin victory on top of an impossible win by Trump in the first place, because after the famous, they let you grab him by the, which they had ready as a Trump destroyer, he somehow came back from that. That was impossible to come back from. There was no one in political history could ever have come back from that. And so these were unexpected. They didn't expect to happen. Meanwhile, the rest of the planet knows well what they're up to from the moment 9/11 happens. Vladimir Putin doesn't come out and tell everybody 9/11 was an inside job. You can't do that. You have to have proof and shit. And anyway, that's the geopolitics of it. It scares the shit out of people. No one's going to come out and talk about it. They all knew, because the US had already said they were pulling out of their nuclear control stuff earlier. And the UK people had passed legislation that insulated themselves from any repercussions ever in international criminal courts, etc. So these people were clearly gearing up for doing major nasty business and making sure they didn't get caught on it. And the rest of the world knew. Russians knew, Chinese knew, everybody knew. So then it got even worse. And by 2008, well, we were in a situation where they had now screwed the entire world financially with their bullshit paper that they were producing, fake paper they were producing. They were again printing dollars. And we had the whole era of corporate welfare as they started to pour money into their own corporate structures at 0% and into their military industrial complex at 0% to expand it, and thus screwing everybody else, because they're using the dollar they're printing them for nothing and then using them to buy loads of stuff and then coming, attacking your country, defeating you, and then getting you to pay for the entire enterprise by loaning you these printed dollars, and you have to pay them back forever. So they were at war. And as they moved on, you saw the Clinton agenda as they destroyed Libya, Syria. You saw all the foreign military adventures, but you saw that destruction of Libya and Syria. This was the Clinton agenda: destroy, destroy. So the rest of the world knew. And they were preparing and preparing. And of course, they were getting bigger and bigger as the United States proportion of global trade shrunk from pre-9/11, 45% of global trade down to 25% of global trade by the time we're starting to head into the final years of this. And their whole plan had been to globalize, to extend this financial network of dollar control over as much of the globe as possible. And they were trying to come into my web, says the spider, to the fly was the game they were playing. And that's why you had Vladimir Putin prepared to go along with the, okay, right, we're going to come in and we're going to participate in a global structure of some kind, and giving them a bit of run to see would they actually deliver on it. But he was never a member of Klaus Schwab's World Economic Forum, despite Schwab's reference to that. He was, however, Schwab is right, you doddery old twit. He was someone who used to show up to your meetings, all right. He used to show up to the WEF stuff, but he wasn't a member of the Young Global Leaders. No, right. He was always independent. And so Putin, Xi, the BRICS, I highlighted this as soon as, Ukraine hit, and they clamped down on the sanctions, and suddenly they found that the rest of the world's preparations ever since 9/11, ever since 2008, and ever since they saw the writing on the wall was they had hoarded gold, they were ready, and they're going to break entirely free of the Western financial structure in a huge global revolt. And again, the fact that most of your mainstream alternative media is not talking about that shows you how controlled they are. This isn't about a Ukraine war. It's fantastic news. 60% of the planet has thrown off the chains of this. So how does that screw them up? Well, when you take all that real stuff and take it out of the economy, it leaves the economy filled with all the virtual shit that they've been filling it full of at 0%. Their economy, our economy now, is hollowed out. And the rest of the planet's departure out of it is the reason for its imminent collapse. So that collapse, their idea of this reset and all that was to extend this net as far as possible, have a collapse, and then use that network to roll out all the digital this, digital that, and digital the rest. But it's all over. They can't do another pandemic. You can't, because we're on it. The first time, element of surprise, right? First time, element of surprise. Also, we get thrown off of all of our favorite social media, and we can't even distribute our counter propaganda against them. So they're really on a roll. But of course, when that mattered, we won that battle. We won that battle on the streets. People won it on the streets. We won it with putting our stuff out. People were beaten off the streets and they came back on it. They wouldn't stay off the streets. They refused to cow down. This COVID was being used, of course, as a psychological breaker weapon in order to just use something that was semi-plausible to break your will, to get you to take the job and submit. So the psychological aspect was what was required. But we resisted that, the people who were hardcore activists. And also, as we began to form our independent media, we began to meme out stuff. And even with their controls, we won it on memetics. We didn't need to try and overwhelm their overwhelming propaganda. We couldn't do that. All we ever needed to do was to reach the 15 to 20% of people who are prepared to be a little bit skeptical, because they're always there. And if you can get to them, you can win. And we won by getting to them. We got to them with funny little memes and pictures that you just looked at the thing and you couldn't help laughing, because it was one of our really great memes about how fake and nonsense all of the COVID stuff was. And we just kept pumping them out, pumping the information out, undermining them, staying out on the streets. We won the battle. The battle of World War III, the battle of the Great Reset has already taken place, and they lost it. And they're now on the defensive, and they can't try another operation, because this time around, we mightn't be slow off the mark coming back at them. Because we're onto it all, if they pulled anything, we might get very, very angry about it all, knowing exactly what's going on. And we might have the distribution capability to spread the word to others who might get very, very angry about it too. and then it would be game over. So as long as you have all of that momentum, it's all going great. But now they're fracturing, and now instead of being in control as the reset thing happens, they're not in control as it happens. Thus, the quick move in the United Kingdom to bury the Tory party quick before the backlash begins, and to get Labour in. And obviously that's not going to work in the United States. But in terms of where they're at, I think just watch the protests on the streets in many countries at the moment. Look at the implosion of their economic system. Look at nothing, they have nothing to offer people. Look at the tide of history moving against them. No, we've won. That's the part that makes me really happy.
Good. Any more questions out there before we move forward? Anyone
Thanks,
else?
folks.
All right. Go on, Tony.
Great talk, Fintan. I'm also a conspiracy theorist, and it's very complicated once you get into it because there is so much disinformation and controlled opposition to know which conspiracy theory to believe. So I am a flat earther, and although there is controlled opposition to flat earth in the Flat Earth Society, I follow the science. So I've offered to this group anyone who can prove the globe and measure the curvature of the earth. I've offered them $10,000. Nobody's taken me up on that yet. So you're welcome to that $10,000 too, if you can just go out and measure the curve.
Yep.
It's all yours. So please do that, and I'll direct transfer you the money. Yep. But I want to talk to you about 9/11 because I'm in the Judy Wood school of the 9/11 collapse, in that it was a directed energy weapon collapse because the building actually didn't hit the ground. If it was a controlled, if it was bombs or if it was the bombs in the plane, the building would have pancaked and all the rubble would have been on the floor. Instead, the building turned to dust and uniform dust. So there was material which changed composition to a uniform dust, and it didn't hit the floor and there was no rubble. So Judy Wood actually claims that the truth movement is controlled disinformation so obviously it was an inside job, but just to keep them away from the reality of the weapon that was used to destroy the buildings. So I just want to know what you think about that theory.
Well, you know, there's a lot of people had all sorts of theories about what might have happened, and most of them were highly flaky. And you know, Judy's was possibly amongst the most flaky of them all. I don't think there's any basis on which you could buy it. The other theories, of course, was the theramate, what's that flowing out of the buildings, and we had the squibs, and we had the jets coming out of rubble coming out from what must have been bombs, etc. So no, I don't buy any of those theories. I did an interview with Richard Gage where I challenged him. He's the founder of Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. I think that was in 2006, something like that, where I explained the mechanism, how the towers came down and how simple it was. I've laid out the basics of the mechanics of it, how you can see how operationally it's very straightforward to conduct using the technology they had at the time, because cruise missiles, as we know, which they deployed in the subsequent Iraq war, could fly down a main street in Baghdad and take a right-hand turn and then go into the third window on the left on the fourth floor of that building there. You could direct them with literal pinpoint accuracy. So believe me, the American defense industry establishment had plenty of capability to produce these technological weapons. In order also to take the buildings down, you had to hit them really hard. And to do that, you had to hit them at around 500-ish miles per hour. Bit of a problem with that if you have a regular aircraft that has not been specially strengthened, because although they can fly at those speeds, that applies at 30,000 feet, where the air is so thin, you couldn't even breathe. You try that down at sea level, And what happens is that your wings just start to go like this, and then they just rip off. That's what happens. So the fact that those planes came in at that speed is inexplicable unless the planes themselves were reinforced. In terms of actually bringing down the towers, they had a tube-in-tube design, absolutely unique. There's no other buildings which were constructed in this manner. A central core, and then floors which were attached to the core and then attached to the perimeter as well. The floors held the perimeter to the core. What happened when you take your plane and you angle it as they did, both planes angled, which look at the impacts on the buildings, you'll see that they're angled at this angle, is you spread the fire across around about 5 floors. That's just optimal. Don't want to spread it over 7 or 8 floors, like if you go in like this, because the fires on each floor might be too small to generate the total building collapse. No, you gotta spread it out about 5 floors, so you get a huge air gap in the side of the building through which you can suck in loads of new air. And also the fire is spread across 5 floors, and you've affected the structural integrity of the flooring itself, and a huge conflagration will start up. Once that happens, those floors will start to sag because of the heat, and they're all sagging. And this was visible by helicopters which were flying around the 9/11, the building on 9/11. They were saying, look at the walls are being pulled in. It's going to go down. That's exactly what happened. As those floors sagged, the fact that they were attached to the walls at the outside and to the core, and the core was so strong, they pulled the wall in. And it's like cards, as long as they're all perfectly straight like that, that the walls are able to stand up. But you kink them slightly like this, with all that weight, and they're just going to give. And that's exactly how they were taken down. And in order to do that, all you have to do is make sure you hit them the right angle and hard enough, and with plenty of jet fuel. And you could take those buildings down. Now, building 7 is a different question. Building 7, there are many indications that building 7 was taken down with some kind of controlled demolition, because we have the inexplicable free fall which took place in building 7 during a large portion of its collapse. And free fall means there was nothing impeding the fall. The speed was as if you had dropped a piece of rock off the side of the building. It would hit the ground at the same speed as the building hit the ground. Well, normally buildings don't do that. They resist if it's a natural collapse. So building 7, yeah, there are indications of a controlled demolition being used there. But on the 2 twin towers, no, the 2 planes were absolutely sufficient to do that. And I just come back on the flat earth thing, because I respect people's views because of the fact they've been exposed to so much information without the counter argument, because that's what they do. They construct and they don't put the counter argument. So you get an unfair presentation. It's just like with the Pentagon, where they try to convince everybody there was no plane, carefully avoiding the fact that one thing that just made it just ridiculous to make that assertion. So in the case of the flat earth issue, a lot of the photographs which are used attempting to prove the horizon is flat and all this, don't realize you have to go really, really high in order to finally start to see earth curvature. It just does not happen until you're a long way up. But in terms of proving what's going on with the earth, I don't want your 10 grand, bud, because you put that to some other good use. But if you want to do it, it's fairly straightforward to do it. You just need a large globe, you know, like one of the globe earths. You could use one of those, even if you don't buy that it is real. And then you just need to go to any of the major aircraft websites where you go to book a plane. And you need to find out how long does it take you to fly from Johannesburg to Rio de Janeiro. And it says 5.5 hours. And if it says 5.5 hours, you get a piece of string and you cut it 5.5 units long, and you snip off the end. So it's 5.5 units long, and you get that and you put it on the globe, and you put one end in Johannesburg and the other end on Rio. And then you look for another flight. And sooner or later, you're going to have all these little strings And they're all stringing, connecting all these different flight destinations, not based on any, weird measurements or anything, but just simply finding out how long it does actually take to fly from A to B. And you'll find the only way those strings all link up right is if they're on a spherical surface. It's a very simple way of proving it one way or the other. And you can get the same thing and get a flat sheet of stuff and get the strings. Just check the length of each string. It must be the number of hours it takes to fly from the different points. And you'll find they won't fit on a flat surface. They won't. Some of them will be too short. Others will be too long. But on a curved spherical surface, they will fit. But it's good to raise questions, nevertheless, about the nature of the Earth, because that's something I do question in the work I do, as to whether there's more than one arrangement of these planets that we're looking at that might be actually going on, whether there's a quantum underlying arrangement of them. But in terms of the way they're actually arranged, I'm fairly happy they're arranged as spheres.
Fintan, we've got one more question, and then we might have to wrap. Then we can do an overview, perhaps.
Yeah, well, I'm just going to cover one or two other things on the more esoteric stuff as we just take a look at some ideas about the nature of reality. Yeah.
Yeah, Fintan, could I just finish off here with you? Thank you. It's wonderful. But back to 9/11.
Yeah,
I was in Cleveland on the morning of 9/11. We got evacuated. It looked like complete bullshit to me on the news that day. I was an early member of Scholars for 9/11 Truth with Kevin Bauer and Stephen Jones, some of these guys. It was an interesting time, but the whole movement fell apart because everybody spent all their time talking about different theories about how it came down. It doesn't matter. That's the distraction. The point about it is, who fucking did it? Yeah. Why did they do it? Okay, we know who they are. They were the neocons. They wrote about it in the Project for American Century when they were out of power in 99. It tied in with the Greater Israel Project. These were elements of the deep state acting on behalf of somebody more powerful, because none of these Bush factions have the power to do that. This came right from the very top. And I'm not talking about, your old bloodlines. I agree with you. Power resides in the current. But the point about it is, who did it and why? If there was a proper investigation, it would track down who was in charge of air traffic control that day. Okay, now we're still living in the effects of that. If you went to bed on the evening of September 10th and woke up today, you wouldn't recognize the world. And it all started there. But the conversations about proving the fact it was an inside job, they're redundant. It doesn't matter. Who did it? That's what we need to talk about. What were those links? All that evidence is what's likely to get us to the truth. And people are more ready to hear it now. Anyway, listen, I'll let you carry on with your talk. If you want to comment on that, that's fine, but I'll finish now. Thank you, Fintan.
Yeah, well, thanks for that comment. And Scholars for 9/11 Truth did actually do actual academic work, that you could treat with some kind of credibility, and I think that's where they were a league above Judy Wood. Scholars for 9/11 Truth, where a lot of people, and I respect the work that people in that did, and a lot of people did, trying to get to the truth. And I agree with your central point about that, the idea of focusing us on, look, we have to prove to the normies that this was an inside job by finding out how they did it, and then we'd be able to prove to the normies. It was a complete diversion. It was always going to be the most important question was, who did this, not how. But nevertheless, as an investigator, it was my job to actually work out how, because we had to actually know how it was actually done in order to at least have a solid foundation that we could move forward ourselves and base our analysis on. And in terms of the deep state, I'm glad to say that Donald Trump has got a team for the last year and a half, certainly. They've been working very hard, and that team's job is to come up with literally thousands of people in the administrative structure of the United States civil service apparatus, which is the word for the deep state, and intelligence and military and other apparatus, who will be fired, who will be just dumped. And they're also putting together a list of people who will replace them. That is the heart of the deep state, the administrative structure of the civil service, which has which Trump plans to dismantle. And I'm not sure if Ron DeSantis will be the kind of guy who would dismantle that with the same enthusiasm at all. But hopefully I've addressed some of those points. And it is pressing on, and we do want to move on. So I'm going to just move on to the final topic theme. And that is, as I said, yeah, go ahead, Pat. Yeah.
Go, you go.
Yeah, okay. Just give me a moment to compose my thoughts on that. Yeah, this is a time when we need to start re-examining stuff. And flat Earth is a very good place to start re-examining it. Because, of course, we've had two major arrangements of the way the universe is structured, haven't we? We've had the, human-centered one, it was, really, which said that, well, I certainly can't feel any planet moving. Seems fairly stationary to me, and I'm sure that's your perception as well. And it does seem as if we're in a fixed position and the sky and the sun and all the stars rotate around us. That was the sort of human-centered vision. But I think we would just be a little bit careful about tossing that out as if, well, that was clearly wrong. It was totally wrong. And it turns out that the Earth is going around the sun, and that we know. And I'm not arguing with that. Geometrically, that's absolutely the case. We revolve around the sun, planet, all of that's geometrically absolutely correct. But just be a little bit careful about throwing out what the human perspective on the universe is, as if that's irrelevant. Because frankly, that assumes that we're irrelevant. And I think that we mightn't be irrelevant. And here's why we mightn't be irrelevant. Now, one of the ways to make new discoveries is to spot what everybody else isn't seeing. Something that everyone's taking for granted. I'll give you a great example of that. There's Sir Isaac Newton, and he's sitting there, and next minute this apple falls to the ground. My God, he says, struck with a sudden question in his mind. And there's a country bumpkin nearby, and the country bumpkin says, "What's that, Mr. Newton?" Because he's only Mr. Newton then, he's not Sir Isaac at the time. And Isaac Newton says, "The apple, it fell." "Well, yes, it did, sir," says the country bumpkin. "What about that?" "Well," it says, "there must be some reason why it fell," says Newton. "Well, there is," says the country bumpkin. "Things fall when there's nothing holding them up. They fall." "Yes, but there has to be a cause. There must be a force." "Well, I know Mr. Newton is a force of the waves. I can see them and feel them. There's a force of the air. Well, I can't see no force needed for an apple to fall. Things fall. That's what happens to things. You push them off a table, Mr. Newton, they falls. Don't know why we needs no force." But you see, there's something that's absolutely taken for granted. Stuff falls. But he's saying, no, there's an invisible force. There's some reason behind that. You can't just take that for granted. There's a reason things fall. So it's this ability to look at something and say, that's something we're taking for granted. So let's start with one thing we're taking for granted, that I think is the greatest blunder science has ever made. We're taking for granted that the sun and the moon are the same size in the sky, and that we get perfect eclipses, and that we get that shape, don't we? When you can see the sun moving across the moon, and it slowly starts to cover it until eventually there's only a tiny little crescent left, and eventually it's all covered. But then you also see that as the moon goes around the Earth, you see the moon having a small crescent and then a larger amount and then an even larger amount. So you've got these two spheres and they're moving across each other. And I'm thinking, I wonder, is there some mechanism there that's giving us those two spheres the same size? Is there some underlying mechanism? Like, can I work that underlying mechanism out? What it might be like say a cuckoo clock, when it comes to 11 o'clock and the cuckoo comes out, cuckoo, cuckoo. I can theorize there must be a little lever in there that when the thing comes up to the top of 11, it pushes a thing and then that makes the cuckoo come out. And then there's probably some other thing that pushes on a thing to make the noise. And then as the thing turns, it must hit another lever that pulls the cuckoo back in. See, I'm starting to work out, there must be an underlying structure there that's behind that, making that happen. So I'm thinking it's just a bit too coincidental. I mean, the odds of the sun and moon being the same size, we could have a sun any size, we could have a moon any size, but they're bang on the same size. That's just too coincidental. I'm not taking that for granted. I want to know why those two things are the same size. That's one. And now we're because we're asking questions about what revolves around what and why it revolves around it. So this is legitimate questioning. So let's take a look at another thing that we're taking for granted now. I'm giving you teasers into this. And I have something here we're taking for granted. Mirror. Why do we take these things for granted? I think it's just a piece of simple technology, yeah? Just some silver on the back of a piece of glass. No. Think about it. A laptop's a flat plane. A piece of art is a flat plane. Television's a flat plane. Mirror's a flat plane. What is it about mirrors? Why did Alice go through the mirror? Can you go through a mirror? Can you go through a mirror? Is there anything in there? Do you see that second Fintan Dunne in there? Is there anything in there? What do you say? No, there isn't. Look, there's nothing there. Are we agreed? I mean, it looks like another fantasy. It looks like that. It looks like another version of the plant there. And it looks like there's another room in there. Just sort of a duplicate of this one. That's what Alice found. Alice got up on the fireplace and she could see that in the other room in there, they had a fire in there too. And she could see the flickering flames of the fire. She couldn't see the fire itself because it's out of sight. The only way she could see it, she could just step through the mirror and get into the other room. Well, of course, we're saying, of course, that's nonsense. There's nothing there. It's just an illusion. There is nothing there. It's not a duplicate of this room. It's just this room. It's not a duplicate. There's nothing there. There's nothing on the far side of the mirror. Sure? Sure, there's nothing on the far side of the mirror. That's what the mainstream says. That's what conventional wisdom says. There's nothing on the far side of the mirror. So what are we taking for granted here? We're agreed there's nothing on the far side of the mirror. Okay. Here we go. Let's just try this. I've made a new person, look. Out of half of me. All of us only have half of me. I mean, you don't have two arms. You have one arm, but you have it twice. You have one hand twice. You have an ear twice. You have an eye twice. You have one nose, one mouth, two ears. How is it I've got a mirror down the middle of my body. How is it I can make a full person out of that? Hold on. Half of me is in the mirror. But we all agreed there's nothing there. But half of me is in the mirror. Let's take a look at something else. Let's take a look at what mirrors are actually doing. And a lot of people don't know what mirrors are doing. A lot of talk about this. Let me just get something that's going to show you. Left hand. Right hand. That's funny, isn't it? Which of the two sides of us is the physical one, and which of the two sides of us is the concept one? I mean, is one of our hands real and the other is, like the other side of the mirror, not real? Why are we halfway into a mirror? Let's have a look at what mirrors really do now. This is a left-hand glove, and I can make it into a right-hand glove in the mirror. See, make it into a right-hand glove. How do I make it into a right-hand glove in the real world, though? Watch. Turn it inside out. Mirrors turn things inside out. Weird. Mirrors turn things inside out. That's what they're doing. And what do we call that? A right hand. What's the Latin for right? Dexter. Dexter is the Latin for right. What's the Latin for left? Sinister. Yes, indeed. Sinister. Anything on the left, anything in that mirror, sinister. How did the word left become demonized? What's going on with this left, right? Remember that thing about the sun and the moon being the same size in the sky? Here's the final one now. Let's just take another look at the mirror man. I've got things I'm using to look at that mirror as you're using to look at me. And there's the half of me in the mirror. The half of me that isn't in tree space. What kind of space is that other half of me in? And I still have to explain how I have that mirror plane down the middle of my body and why the most important organs in my body are right each side of it. Like two eyes. There I am, my two eyes each side of the mirror. Reflecting. But why the sun and the moon are the same size in the sky is this. Because just like I have two eyes either side of the mirror plane, we have two spheres. And I can model them like this. By a pair of eyeballs. But in truth, they're mirrors of each other, the sun and the moon. And in truth, this is gold. This is silver. When you turn silver inside out, it becomes gold. Silver on the inside of the mirror. What's the mirror? Silver. What's the moon? The silver sphere. What does the moon do in the sky? Reflect. Yeah, we've got one eye in tree space, folks. And we've got another eye in spirit space. And it may be that the mind we have is in the spirit space, and that the body we have is when we step through the mirror and out into the real world, halfway. So if you do manage to step into a mirror like Alice, halfway, like I just showed you, don't step in the rest of the way yet. We miss you. That's the teaser, folks.
Very
Hopefully
good.
Just giving you some stuff to think about the nature of the world.
Quantum projection, perhaps.
Well, yes, we are wrapped around the quantum part. It seems to me that what we are is half of us is indestructible because it's concept, pure concept. The idea of me reflected out. Bear in mind also that not only are we mirrored like that, but it's your right brain goes across the mirror and controls the left-hand side of your body, and your left brain goes across the mirror and out to the right-hand side of your body, just as if you had simultaneously stepped into each side. So this phenomenon, we see prayer down the center of the body, this mirror plane down the center of the body seems to be the bridge between the spirit world and the human world. Therefore, to ask the question, do we have a spirit nature, is to entirely miss the point, because the mirror is telling you we have a spirit nature, with both a material and an immaterial, seemingly nothing side. And that nothing thing is wrapped inside of everything, sees everything, records everything, and it's the eye of time. So we have your eye of space, which you see the world in which we're living right now, but your eye of time is immortal. And you're a combination of both an eye of space and an eye of time. And you're immortal.
Right. Fintan, fantastic talk. Thank you. We normally finish up on a high note. Is there something, an uplifting message or a quick summary? I mean, you sort of already summarized already, but just to wind things up, have you got any closing thoughts you want to close out with?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's very important for us to continue to disconnect from mainstream, because both mainstream and, as you've seen to a degree, alternative, are corrupting us by setting our agendas. And I think that what you folks are doing here, where you investigate with an open mind across multiple issues itself, and you determine the direction you're going, and follow your own instincts on it, is the way to go. That we need to be very careful about buying into the vast amount of stuff which is being pumped out at us as we do this right now, because there's an awful lot of diversion and deception involved in both the mainstream and alternative media. So part of what we need to do is to disconnect from that and having any reference to it. You know, we are living in a world where not only are we being plied with propaganda right now, but it is built on layers and layers and layers of propaganda, which is underneath historical stuff, which prevents us from seeing the truth. So that's, I think, the whole idea of the independent thought motive that you have, and the way you're meeting and the way you're addressing this, absolutely the way to do it. This is the format we need, folks, so that we can, whether it's in the United States or in Ireland or in India or in Indonesia or wherever it is, even if it's on an island off of the coast of Thailand, that we have the ability to interact with each other, share information, and educate each other as to the sort of stuff that's going on. That's my first key message as we take away. Believe in yourself, believe in what you're at, because you are, and we are, the real source of truth here. And that light of inquiry and open-minded inquiry is absolutely vital. That's what guides us out of the darkness and leads us to solutions that we can actually, embrace, and we know we're on solid ground, is when you start to decode it and work it out. I hope I've helped with that today. But the second part of it is that our media is not reflecting the reality. We've had a global revolt against this new world order now. not only externally in other countries, but internally within those corrupted G7 nations, which are now hollowed out shells of what they had hoped to be. And so realize that this has been, over the last few years, a huge triumph. They're never going to acknowledge that. They're never going to let on that you've had that huge triumph. In fact, the constant propaganda up until the final day when we break through, when we see dramatic events, I think we're going to see politically, will be to try and reinforce in our minds that we're getting nowhere, that they're just going to plow on with their agendas and plow on with their propaganda on TVs, etc. Ignore it all. It's not going to win. We've already won, and we need to just move on now and leave them behind. Do not be intimidated by their propaganda. It's over. They have lost. And now that's why I brought up these issues of re-examining. I don't think we should just re-examine the nature of the world and answer these questions like, why are these? But we need to re-examine the social structure we're operating under, the health structure we're operating under. We need to get completely out from underneath it. The food structure the stuff that we're consuming. These are the key important things to do. And it's less important to get diverted into whether there are Luciferian blood-drinking adrenochrome rites going on in some secret fucking underground bunker. It's more important for us to figure out what shit in the supermarket can I safely eat, and if not, what food can I consume, and how do I get myself out from underneath the pharma medical complex, take control of my own health and safeguard my own health without their being involved. These are ways of creating our own independence from the system and disconnecting from it. We need to question everything, especially the arenas of health and food, which are literally poisoning us, and we need to take control of that. So there's nothing they can do about these things that we do to educate ourselves to opt out, to choose the right kind of choices. Now, any kind of political blockages they put on that, doesn't matter if we're grassroots putting it into effect and constructing our own ideas of what we should be doing, what we should be eating, and what we should do when we feel ill, whether we should or shouldn't consult medical doctors. I think we need to start boycotting doctors, and we need to start building networks where we network with the doctors who are prepared to tell the truth, disavow money, and deal with us with actual real science. So those kinds of building out knowledge is the sort of empowerment we need. Your health is your wealth, and food, health, pharma is all coming together, and we can make developments in those areas, even if they're blocking us on political levels. Doesn't matter. The most important stuff is what we do every day, how we live every day. And thanks very much as well too for folks for inviting me here tonight. It's been a welcome opportunity to get stuff out that I don't always do, because of having taken this thing of exposing the disinformation, which means that much of my content is either blocked on YouTube because they think I'm a conspiracy theorist, or blocked by the fake conspiracy theorists because they know bloody well I am a conspiracy theorist. So thanks for the invite, folks, and the opportunity.
Thank you, Fintan. You've given us all a lot to think about, and if you're up for it, we'd love to have you back again to continue some of those concepts that you were giving us a teaser on at the end there. But
yeah, well, that's I'd love to do that, because it's something that I've been gearing up to do, because one of the greatest ways, and I'll finish on this note, of disempowering us at a primal level, and this doesn't even have to be conscious on the part of evil. Evil is often unconscious in its actions, but one of the greatest abilities to hamper us is to try to convince us that we are mortal, that there is some kind of external judgment which is going to be done on us. You are your own judge. We are our own judges. And we are moving forward in time under our own direction, not their direction or anybody else's direction. We are absolutely immortal. We are completely indestructible. And the idea of any human being simply cannot be invented. We simply move on through time. So to connect us with that reality is absolutely vital. If you like, a union between some of the things that science believes in and some of the things that religion believes in. And that's an area I like to touch on and just take the best out of both. And what I've found through my investigations is that science has a lot that's right, but so is religion. A lot of the basic idea that, hey, it doesn't just end when the material half of your body gets buried, but that there is another half of your body, which you've just seen, which is an indestructible component. And once you are in touch with that reality, now you're free. Here's why. There is nothing that you can do to take anything away from an immortal being who lives through time. Kill me, shoot me, I don't care. I'll be back again, just like that. You can't get rid of me. It doesn't matter. What can you take away from me if I have 70,000 lifetimes to go? And you screw around with one of them. Big deal. I'm not really that worried. I've got all the time in the world, and we all do. So let's dump the fear and believe in ourselves.
So Fintan, thank you for that. And just finally, speaking of connection and dumping the fear, would you endorse or encourage the creation of groups like ours? Do you think that plays a role in what's coming and what's happening right now? Do you think the creation of groups such as ours is a good idea to see happening in other places?
Yeah, I love the idea of what the Samui real idea is doing. And I think it's very important to form these independent groups, but also for us to network and internetwork so that we're doing cross connection with each other, informing each other, and that will give us even greater strength, like the way the spokes in a wheel connect from side to side across the wheel and strengthen the whole thing then. So yes, we need to set the groups up. We need to keep them internetworked, and we need to, if you like, create community and do more of this. It's wonderful. It's great to see. And I'm always happy when I'm in the company of conspiracy theorists and look forward to it again.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Right on. Thank you, Fintan, again.
Thank you too.
Thank you very much. And thank you from everybody here, Samui Real. Thank you, Fintan, to your Telegram viewers, and thank you to our viewers again. It was wonderful having you tonight. Thank you, Pat. And we'd love to see you back again soon. So final hand for Fintan, guys. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks, PK and PC.
Okay. Take care. Thank you.